Hey there, y'all. Peter Barclay here, and I am your host of True North Sports Talk podcast. And we are here to kick off another episode. And today, we are talking about Canadian football action. That is going to be what we're doing here. We're getting you set for a new season, which is going to kick off in around 2 weeks' time. And yeah, so we're going to talk everything football, everything CFL related. We're going to get into some drafting, some trading. We're going to talk new leadership, and we're going to see what we think for the upcoming season. Now, the start date that you're going to want to put on your calendar for the beginning of the CFL season is June 5th. And that game will be Ottawa and Saskatchewan that will be kicking that off. And so there's the 9 teams and 21 weeks, and it's a Grey Cup chase that is going to end in one team hoisting the Grey Cup. And new for this year, the 2025 season, is Stewart Johnston has been appointed the 15th CFL Commissioner on April 2nd. As announced by the CFL, and he replaces Randy Ambrosie. And Randy Ambrosie has been the CFL's commissioner for the last 7 years. And Johnston, he was in the background the last few years, 7 years or so, maybe more, as an executive in the business and operations side of things. And he takes over a league that's at a crossroads of sorts. Viewership in CFL Plus streaming expanded, but he faces challenges like the salary cap enforcement, as the BC Lions forfeited picks in the 2025 draft for exceeding the salary cap by about $350,000. So can Johnson bring stability and innovation, or will he struggle to address fan concerns about officiating, competitive balance, that kind of stuff? Is he going to be able to stabilize, solidify, and grow and expand a league that has always struggled for its place in the pro sports landscape up here north of the border in Canada? So, we're gonna preview some season things, diving into player moves, draft impacts, and how these changes are gonna set up teams like Winnipeg, Toronto, Hamilton. Will they succeed with the moves they've made? Will they struggle? And so we're going to break down what's new and what this means for the race to the Grey Cup. And let's just jump right into it here. We are going to start off with some moves that have been made during the free agency period between November and now. And free agency for the CFL, it opens in February, about the time the Major League Baseball kicks off their spring training in February. And there were some significant moves that were made. Teams are now set, and training camp cut downs, they began on May 19th. So we're starting to see these rosters take the form that they are going to have throughout the season. Some of the notable moves: Edmonton, the Elks signed former BC Lions receiver Alexander Hollins after a CFLPA grievance. Hollins in 2024 was an all-star with 1,363 receiving yards, and he bolsters an Elks offense led by the QB Trey Ford. They also signed former NFL receiver Kyrus Jackson, adding more depth. Unfortunately, Edmonton forfeited their first-round draft pick after selecting Zach Mathis in the 2024 supplemental draft, which could hurt their long-term Canadian depth. And if you know anything about CFL rosters, you are required a certain amount of Canadian players to be on your roster. The Saskatchewan Roughriders, jumping over a province there, they signed veteran center Sean McEwen from Calgary, which is a massive get for their offensive line. But they also traded Jake Meyer to Calgary for a 7th round pick after Meyer re-signed with Saskatchewan back in January. It's a bit of a puzzling move, leaves them a little thin at QB behind Trevor Harris, and we will see how that turns out for them, what they plan to do to keep up with the rest of the league. The Toronto Argonauts lost defensive end Robbie Smith, and he is the CFL's highest paid defender, to Edmonton, but they replaced him with draft pick Jeremiah Ojo. And we'll get to more on him later, as he's a draft pick when we're talking about significant drafts in the CFL. Toronto's offense is a bit of a question mark this year after trading away Jordan Williams' negotiation rights in the pre-draft with Hamilton, which didn't pan out when Williams decided to retire. So these moves show some teams that are either showing some desperation, maybe they're doubling down on trying to compete more. Some teams are loading up, reloading as it were. You have the defending Grey Cup champions with some significant losses. And the Meyer trade is feels like a bit of a misstep, with Trevor Harris now 38, and we're not sure who really their backup is going to be. Hopefully they have something up their sleeves there in Saskatchewan. So, are these teams addressing issues in their locker rooms, or are they just shuffling pieces to mask deeper roster flaws? And that seems to be a thing with the CFL, is that they tend to have a lot of roster turnover because they are a bit of an NFL feeder league, but also too is they're a very small league. And so players do tend to move around from team to team a lot. If you look at quite a few of the players that have played in the league over the years, they may have played for 5, 6, 7 of the 9 teams over the course of a career, because one man's garbage is another man's treasure. And in certain cases, like Meyer's case, he's actually going back to Calgary where he started his career. And so there's things like that go on where players even go back to teams that they've previously played for. And so it's one of those things where it's troubling at times to see how much turnover there can be in the league. It's an exciting league. It's 3-down football, and it's boom, boom, bang. And if you're not on point, then you're giving up the ball. It's turned over, and the fields are bigger. There's a lot more room and ground that you have to cover. And so that's the thing, is it's going to be an exciting year. We'll see what some of these moves did, whether it's a step forward, a step back. And now it's time to see what the new talent that's coming up that may impact teams this year or down the line. And we're going to take a look at the draft that took place on April 29th. There were 72 players selected over 8 rounds, and Winnipeg and BC, they received second round picks for the highest snap percentages in 2024. Calgary held the first overall pick, and some of the key picks that we had were the Calgary Stampeders. They were first overall, taking Damien Alford out of Utah. Alford is a Montreal native, so he's Canadian. He stands 6'5", 224, and he has a 40-yard dash of 4.46 seconds. So despite modest college stats, he played at Syracuse as well as Utah. He had 67 catches, but his size, his speed, that combination on the, as we just mentioned, the larger CFL field, make him a deep threat, and provided he has the hands to back up everything that we see here, he could become a favorite target out there in Calgary. And Calgary needs that spark from somewhere after they had a tough year last year and missed the playoffs altogether. So potentially, we'll see how his camp has been. But he could be an instant contributor alongside the recently acquired, as we mentioned, Jake Meyer, who they got from Saskatchewan. And we will see how that turns out for Calgary, if that's enough to get them back into the playoff picture, or if they're going to remain on the outside looking in. Now, over to Ottawa, the Red Blacks there. They picked third overall and picked wide receiver Keelan White out of Montana. And White's a North Vancouver product. He's a reliable route runner. He's got clutch hands, so good soft hands. He draws comparisons to stars Jalen and Tyson Philpott, and his 40-yard isn't quite what the previous pick was, but it's a 4.6. And his 2023 Montana MVP season shows he's ready, potentially, to contribute right away. Ottawa's in much need of some Canadian receivers, and so White should fit in with that core perfectly. Now, the runners-up in the Grey Cup last year, the Winnipeg Blue Bombers, they picked 6th overall, and they took a defender, linebacker Connor Shay out of Wyoming. Shay stands at about 6'1", 224, and he has been compared to Alex Singleton for his range. He also has dual citizenship, so he could sit on the Canadian side of the ledger for Winnipeg, so that helps them out. And an already stout Winnipeg defense, which was 2.41 points against, it gets even deeper. So Shay could end up on special teams to start out his career, and will have to work his way onto an everyday player on the defense. Now, we already talked a little bit about the Edmonton Elks. They had the 10th overall pick, and they also decided to take a defender in Darian Newell, who's a defensive lineman. And Newell is a Brampton native and a disruptive interior defender. He's got a 34-inch vertical at 6'2" and 287. He's a 3-time U Sports All-Canadian, and he fits Edmonton's need for Canadian defensive depth, especially after losing their first-round pick. Now, the defending champs in the Toronto Argonauts, They picked, as we mentioned before, defensive lineman Jeremiah Ojo. And Ojo's a 6'2", 248 defensive end. He's got long arms, he's got a quick first step, and he is drawing comparisons to Robbie Smith. With an NFL minicamp invite from the New York Giants, that tends to show that he's a high upside pick for Toronto to replace Smith's production that, as we mentioned, they lost him to free agency. Now, some trends from the draft. The draft saw a historic quarterback class. 3 quarterbacks were taken, including Winnipeg's Curtis Rourke, who was number 25 out of Indiana, and Taylor Elgersma was the 18th pick out of Laurier. And this reflects that the league had a shift toward Canadian quarterbacks, as BC's Nathan Rourke and Edmonton's Trey Ford were starting in 2025. So the draft prioritized playmakers this year. Teams were in very serious need of some high-end playmaking. Alford, White, Ojo. These are players, as we mentioned, you could see taking places immediately on CFL rosters. The offensive line class this year was a little bit weaker, and as Jim Barker mentioned on TSN, it could be the worst we've seen, which might hurt teams like Calgary and Hamilton, who needed that upfront trench help. Winnipeg's pick of Shay is a safe, high-floor move, but will they regret passing on QBs like Rourke, given that Zach Collaros is getting up there in age? He's in his 36-year season. And the draft is always an exciting time, no matter what sport you're in, what team you're on. There's always that sense of that shiny new toy in the toolbox that you will have as a team and as an organization going forward. So this was an exciting time. The league looks forward to building some new superstars, some new Canadian superstars, as this draft seemed to be stoked and stocked with upper level Canadian talent. So we're going to take a look at some outlooks for some of these teams. And one of the teams we're going to look at is the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. And they are going to remain a strong team in the West. They are potentially favorites to represent the West in the Grey Cup again this year. Their defense is always strong. They're adding Connor Shay to bolster their linebacker depth. And even though Zach Collaros is another year older, they're going to have to start looking. They may not need it this year or next year, but they're going to need to groom a successor there in Winnipeg. And they drafted Rourke, but there's still some questions as to who they're going to have backing up Collaros. The question for them this year will be, can they finally break through? They were a dynasty for 3-4 years. They were winning a lot, but they've had some near misses the last 2 years, and so the question will be, can they return to glory and continue that dynasty? So the Argonauts, here in Toronto, in Ontario, they took a hit with Robbie Smith's departure, but the potential of Ojo and a solid core four with Chad Kelly, Kadeem Carey, can they keep them competitive in the East at the top and defend their Grey Cup? Their draft focus on defense over offense, it might bite them because they're counting on Chad Kelly, and he's coming back off an injury. And if he can't elevate them up, then it could be a tough sled for the Argos. Down the QEW in Hamilton with the Tiger Cats. The Ticats drafted pretty well, actually. They took linebacker Devin Veresic at number 2 overall. He brings elite athleticism, sub 4.5 in the 40-yard. They got O-lineman Arvin Hosseini at number 19, and he also has starter potential on their offensive line. And their trade for Jordan Williams Wrights was a bit of a bust, and losing Bo Levi Mitchell back to Calgary still stings a little bit. And Hamilton needs stability at the quarterback and just a better American to Canadian ratio in order to continue to contend. So the East is going to be hard fought, as it always is. We will see who is able to pull it out and be able to represent the East in the Grey Cup come November. And some other Canadian teams, the Edmonton Elks have Trey Ford, Alexander Hollins, and Darian Newell. That gives them a bit more firepower after losing draft picks, as we mentioned. And they could raise themselves out of the cellars of the West and could surprise a little bit in the West. We'll see. Time will tell any given Sunday. And that's that for them. We're looking at Saskatchewan Roughriders. Sean McEwen strengthens their O-line. And the Meyer trade and an aging Trevor Harris make them a bit of a wild card and a question mark in the West. Drafting defensive lineman Ali Syed and offensive lineman Eric Anderson at number 4 and number 13 respectively. That adds depth, but Saskatchewan's in need of a lot more high-end playmaking for them to succeed and, again, raise themselves up any given Sunday in the West and see if they can challenge Winnipeg at the top of the conference. So, Winnipeg is the safest bet, but coming up down the line, they're going to have to face some tough questions at their quarterback. Toronto and Hamilton have talent, but they face some roster holes. Toronto's offense, Hamilton's quarterback situation. Edmonton and Saskatchewan could be dark horses, but their moves feel more of a patchwork or just getting a little bit better kind of thing, as opposed to a championship blueprint. We haven't talked a lot about Montreal. They're going to be a pretty solid team. They haven't made a whole heap of moves over the offseason. We haven't talked a whole lot about the BC Lions. They haven't made a whole lot of headway over the offseason either. They're expecting better things out of the players they had, as some of them, like some of their seasons last year, just weren't up to par from what they're used to having. So we'll see how it turns out. Again, 9 teams all fighting for that oldest championship in North America in the Grey Cup. And we'll see what it comes down to. And so, just a little bit of a recap here. Commissioner Johnston has some challenges coming up as new commissioner of the CFL. He's got to address that salary cap enforcement situation because it's a league that really does struggle to keep teams out of the red, really. So they have that violation to worry about. They can't allow that to become a precedent. And they have to expand the CFL's streaming viewership. And it's grown in the US and globally. But fan frustration over officiating consistency and the lack of just that consistency is going to put pressure on him to deliver competitive balance and just keep the CFL growing in the direction that it needs to go. So the West Division, let's see, Winnipeg, I would say probably is going to end up coming out of the West again. Saskatchewan and Edmonton will probably be their biggest competition. We'll see how that turns out. Hopefully Calgary bounces back because they've always been pretty solid. We'll see how BC does, what Rourke is able to do out there, whether he's able to lift BC back to where it was just a couple of years ago. But we're looking at Winnipeg probably ending up as your contender or your representative in the West. And we're looking at Toronto, Hamilton, and potentially Montreal in the East, depending on how things shake down at that point. Ottawa is always a wild card. It's a bit of a question mark a lot of times. They're building something fairly good there. It just hasn't come to fruition at this time. Now, who's going to be my pick to reach the Grey Cup? Now, I don't like necessarily doing this. I don't like predictions just based on the fact that it's kind of a crapshoot. If you look at any given Sunday, any team can win at any time. It's always fun just to see who's playing well, see who's not playing well, and go from there. So it's, as always, going to be interesting. Who would I pick? I would say probably Winnipeg, likely Toronto. From the East, the only threats really that I see to either one of those, I would say BC in the West, and perhaps, like I say, Montreal, Hamilton in the East. But for the most part, it's a pretty clear rematch for Winnipeg-Toronto meeting in the Grey Cup again. I would say probably the biggest threat in the East is Montreal at this point. I know folks in Hamilton won't like me saying that. Just looking at the years they had last year, looking at players returning, players changed, all that kind of stuff, I would say that we're just looking at just a steady strength coming out of Montreal. We'll see how it plays out and go from there. So, remember, June 5th, mark it on your calendars. We have Ottawa, Saskatchewan kicking off the season, and let's watch it together. Let's see how this season turns out game by game. As you're watching, use the hashtag TrueNorthSportsTalk, and let's see which Canadian team and which team, because we only have Canadian teams in the CFL, but let's see which team actually pulls it out at the end of the season. So there you have it, guys. Subscribe to the channel. Like the video. If you know anyone that's looking for a preview of the CFL, share it with them. As always, we love to hear your feedback. Let us know if there's anything else that you guys want to see in upcoming episodes of True North Sports Talk. And what do you guys think? Who do you guys think is going to be in the Grey Cup this year? Who do you guys think is going to win? Leave those in the comments. We love you guys here at True North Sports Talk, and we will see you on the next episode.